What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Commissioner's Office podcast. My name is Daniel, and thank you all for joining me here as we have another banger of an episode for you today. I'm not sure if anyone has noticed, but free agency in the NFL has just come and gone, and there are a couple more signings yet to take place. However, a lot of the big moves have happened in the last couple weeks, and today I'm going to kind of run down who were the biggest winners in free agency this year in the NFL and who were also the biggest losers. It's going to be a great episode, but before we get started, I do want to plug a couple things. Number one was the previous podcast episode that I put out a couple months ago. That was my interview with White Sox GM Rick Hahn. I think it's one of my better episodes, so take a look at that one. A lot of riveting stuff we talked about. FM, the voice of New Trier. It's called Chicago Sports Unlimited, and it is on Thursdays at 4 p.m. You can take a listen. I usually am talking about, pretty self-explanatory stuff, the world of Chicago sports. I've been covering the Bears and the pre-draft process the last couple episodes, but I've also been talking about sports going on at New Trier, as well as the Chicago Cubs and the White Sox, as their season has just started today as I'm recording this. Cubs and White Sox had their big games today, their opening day. Cubs did win, which was good. They beat the Brewers 4-0. The White Sox, their game is going on right now as I'm sitting down to record this one. With that out of the way, let's get into these free agency signings here. So yeah, like I said earlier, we're covering which teams do I think came into free agency, did their thing, made some signings, got rid of some players maybe, and are, better because of it, but also some teams that were kind of losers in this free agency. They really just didn't do anything to improve their team, and in some cases, their team is worse off because of the moves they made or did not make. There have been a lot of teams who have made, a ton of signings this year. A lot of teams had a fair amount of cap space. But there were also a few teams that did essentially nothing, or they lost a lot of key pieces. So, without further ado, let's get into who is looking better as a team because of free agency. There are 3 or 4 teams I would like to highlight. I would say the first one for me is going to be the Denver Broncos. This has been a team that they have just had a frustrating season. They came off of a very unexpectedly down year with Russell Wilson at the helm. This was, the piece that they thought was going to complete their team. This is what they thought was going to take them, all the way to the playoffs and maybe even to the Super Bowl. But they actually ended up just going 5-12, which is definitely not the outcome that they wanted and not the outcome that you would expect. This is a team that had so much talent on both sides of the ball. But they just, even though they were in a very competitive AFC West, they just really couldn't get the job done. Chef Russ was not cooking. They ended up firing their head coach, Nathaniel Hackett, midway through the season. Just not a good season for Denver. However, they went into this offseason with an axe to grind, and they made some big moves. Here are the big moves they made. One of them is signing Mike McGlinchey to a 5-year, $87 million deal. Mike McGlinchey is the former right tackle for the 49ers. He played some left tackle for a little bit as well when Trent Williams was out. But really solid signing. He was a first-round pick a couple years ago. He was a guy I wanted the Bears to draft really badly. But, of course they didn't. But now he's with the Broncos. That was not the only offensive lineman they invested in. They also signed Ben Powers, and they gave him a lot of money. He is a former Ravens guard. He's now going to be with the Broncos for a 4-year, $52 million contract. On top of that, they also signed Zach Allen, who's a defensive end from Arizona. They signed him to a 3-year, $46 million deal. And then they also brought back some key guys, such as Alex Singleton, who's a linebacker for them, who had a really solid season. He's kind of a guy who goes under the radar a lot, but they brought him back on a 3-year deal worth $6 million per year. So those were a lot of the key moves they made. I mean, they signed Chris Manhertz to be a backup tight end. They brought in Samaje Perine. who was Joe Mixon's backup over in Cincinnati. They brought in Michael Burton for a fullback spot, but, kind of the offensive linemen and Zach Allen from the Cardinals and Alex Singleton being back on the team are kind of the big signings that Denver made this offseason. And I think that this has really helped them as a team. I mean, now they've kind of fixed up their offensive line for Russell Wilson. Remember, they already have Garrett Bowles, who, even though a lot of people thought he was going to be a bust coming out of the draft, I mean, he was drafted at the age of 26 or something like that, and they used a first-round pick on him. People were like, this is not going to be the guy. But, as his career has gone on, he's developed into a really solid blindside tackle for Denver. And now they got Mike McGlinchey on the other side. The interior offensive line is not as good, but definitely with Ben Powers stepping in, probably going to play left guard. This is a much improved Denver offensive line. And of course, the rest of the offense really goes without saying at this point. You have Russell Wilson. They're hoping that he's going to be able to cook next year. I think that last year Nathaniel Hackett just kind of took his tongs and didn't put any propane in his stove and didn't turn on the fan, and so he was basically just cooking in this smoke-filled room without power. But hopefully their new head coach, Sean Payton, very experienced head coach, should be able to shape up this team. Sean Payton, of course, the Super Bowl winning head coach with the New Orleans Saints. This is going to be a Denver Broncos team that I think is going to be really dangerous next year, because continuing the pieces they have on offense, they still have Cortland Sutton. They still have Jerry Jeudy. They still have KJ Hamler, assuming they don't trade those guys. There were some rumors that Denver was considering trading one of them. That would be a catastrophe if that happened. But if we're going to go under the assumption that John Elway, his cooler head prevails and he, keeps his marquee receivers, I mean, that offense is still really solid. On defense, it's kind of lost its shine over the years. Obviously, Von Miller, not there anymore. A lot of the guys from the Super Bowl teams are not there anymore, of course. But Bradley Chubb was kind of the last piece from the previous regime. He's now on the Dolphins. They still have Patrick Surtain. They still have Justin Simmons. They still have a really solid linebacking core. They're probably missing a good pass rusher, I would say. But bringing in Zach Allen, is definitely a really solid signing. He's kind of a name that a lot of people don't, really think about. He was kind of the lone standout on an otherwise pretty disappointing Cardinals team. Last year, he had 5.5 sacks for 10 tackles for loss, 20 QB hits, translated to about 5 approximate value, or AV, according to Football Reference, which is, I feel like, kind of the equivalent of a WAR in MLB, wins above replacement. So, did they need to pay $15 million a year for Zach Allen? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know the specifics of his contract, whether, they can opt out of it in 2 years or something like that. Maybe they can. However, even if we're going to assume that they overpaid, they splurged for Zach Allen, even though he's still pretty young. I think he's just 25 or 26. Yeah, he's 25. I think that, this is the move that Denver had to make. They have to spend money, and I think their team is probably better because of it. Now, that being said, the AFC West is a very competitive division. Of course, the Chiefs are also in their division. They also have the Chargers with Justin Herbert. They're always a threat. And the Raiders, we don't really know about. They re-signed, they signed Jimmy Garoppolo. They brought in Jacoby Myers. But with Josh McDaniels at the helm, you really never know. However, I think that the Broncos' signings have definitely put them in a spot to compete. Now, the next team I want to talk about is the New York Giants. This is a team that kind of came out of nowhere last year. First-year head coach Brian Daboll, a lot of people didn't know what was this team going to look like. The Giants have kind of just derped their way through, seasons for the past 7-ish years, but with Eli Manning kind of in the rearview mirror and a new, coach who's actually pretty well respected, not, Joe Judge. They thought that this Giants team could maybe start to make some noise, and noise they did. They took down the Vikings in the playoffs. Of course, that was kind of right after that. They ran into the Eagles, and that's where their season ended. But still a really promising first season for head coach Brian Daboll. But they had to make some big moves in the offseason, and let's just say they did. The Giants are also a team that plays in a really competitive division, the NFC East. However, they definitely did their job to make themselves more competitive. How did they do this? They re-signed Daniel Jones. Look, a year ago, if I said that the Giants were going to improve their team by re-signing Daniel Jones, I would be a little skeptical. I would also probably accuse you of hallucinating because for most of his career, Daniel Jones has just not been a very good quarterback. It's not that he's been like, Ryan Leaf, but it's more of that he's just kind of been like meh. However, Brian Daboll has, taken his talent from within, and because he had a career season, only 15 passing touchdowns, 3,200 yards, but 5 interceptions on the year is really solid. Then you also throw in the fact that, he was a threat with, with his legs as well. He could, run pretty well. He had 708 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns on the ground. This is Daniel Jones we're talking about. I mean, the Giants have really just developed a solid scheme that doesn't require him to be Tom Brady, but yet they're still successful. So that was part of it. They re-signed Daniel Jones to an $160 million contract. It sounds like a lot. It's because it is. When I first heard the news that they were going to bring him back for $160 million, I laughed. We'll see how this contract goes down. I think worst case, it could turn out to be like one of those Ryan Tannehill contracts where they just gave him a bag for one good season. But best case, I mean, $40 million a year for a quarterback on a playoff team, honestly, in this day and age, sounds about right. But that was not the only big thing that they did as far as keeping players within the organization. They also franchise tagged Saquon Barkley. That was a huge thing. There's the whole debate nowadays whether you should pay running backs or not. And I think I am a little bit, mostly I'm indifferent on this issue, but I think also I have kind of an unpopular opinion, which is if the running back is good, you pay them. This was something that really made me sad as a Bears fan, as, the Lions poached David Montgomery from us. So now Khalil Herbert's going to be our starting running back, or maybe we'll draft one. I don't know. But, a lot of Bears fans were rejoicing at the sight of Montgomery leaving because, the Lions overpaid because they paid $6 million a year for David Montgomery. Like, first of all, that's not a lot of money. It's just not. And if you think it is, then, you're not thinking in the sense of the modern NFL. You're thinking in the sense of like a house. Paying $6 million for a house is a lot of money. Paying $6 million for 1 year of David Montgomery, or in this case, 3 years of David Montgomery, 3-year deal, $6 million per year. That is a contract that I am more than happy to pay, but Ryan Poles was not. But for Saquon Barkley, they swallow a very, very steep franchise tag. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head how expensive that franchise tag is. I know it's at least $15 million, which, is enough to make the more like analytical side of NFL fans just squirm that, they're paying a running back more than $2 million. Not what I would have done. But anyway, rant aside, they keep Daniel Jones, they keep Saquon Barkley. They also kept Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton, 2 very solid receivers on their team. And they also added Paris Campbell, who's kind of a gadget guy at this point in his career, but still really talented, had kind of a career resurgence after coming off a lot of injury issues with Indianapolis, had a pretty productive year. And they also added a really good weapon on their defense. They brought in Bobby Okereke, who's going to kind of man that middle linebacker role for them coming over from Indianapolis, who, if Indianapolis has done anything right over the last couple of years, it has been developing great linebackers. Darius Leonard, of course, the prime example, but then there's also guys like Bobby Okereke, who was kind of seen as a target for the Bears, but he ended up going to the Giants. You'd think that would be a good enough offseason in itself. How about I throw out adding Darren Waller to the fold as well? The Giants just tossed a 3rd-round pick over to the Raiders, and just as Darren Waller married a WNBA player who plays for the Las Vegas Aces, they trade Darren Waller over to New York. So that was kind of a little bit of a mean move from Josh McDaniels, but the Giants are fine with it because they get a Pro Bowl tight end. Darren Waller, of course, missed a lot of time due to injuries last year with Las Vegas. However, they're hoping that he can be the weapon that they need. And that right there is really the number one target for Daniel Jones right there. Of course, this is a team that already has a couple really solid receivers. They no longer have Kenny Galladay. But, even though Daniel Jones was good this year, they really lacked good weapons. They had solid guys, but now I think they have a little bit more ammo to use against a pretty good NFC East. And then also, we're not even talking about the defense. I mean, their defense was surprisingly stout last year, especially with that great defensive line with Kayvon Thibodeau and Leonard Williams. Now they got a good leader to lead the linebacking core. I mean, they really desperately needed Bobby Okereke, and they got him. And, when we look at their chances in the NFC East, look, you got the Eagles, of course, coming off a Super Bowl berth. You got the Cowboys who made the playoffs again. The Commanders could definitely, rough some people up. You don't want to mess with the commies, but you never know. The NFC East has been kind of volatile in the last couple years, and maybe is starting to straighten out a little bit. But I think the Giants could make a run for the division, especially if Daniel Jones has an even better year than he had last year. And if the Giants have another strong draft, you never know. Of course, the Giants' O-line is still probably an issue, but at least they have, good young tackles in Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal to defend against, the Micah Parsons of the world and, Chase Young and Hassan Reddick. Those are all the pass rushers from their division. It is a tough division to play in if you are an offensive lineman. All right, the third team I'd like to highlight is my Chicago Bears. I was really hopeful to see what King Poles was going to do with his $100 million in cap space, and I have not been disappointed. I think that this was a really solid offseason for the Bears, and I think that they are definitely in a better spot than they previously were. Now, of course, the Bears had arguably the worst season in their franchise's history this past season. They got rid of a lot of their good players, i.e. Roquan Smith, Robert Quinn. A lot of those guys just ended up, being traded for rather minuscule returns. But, with all this cap space, they really just had nowhere to go but up. But I would say that they definitely went up. So what were the moves that the Bears made? Well, first of all, they signed Tremaine Edmonds to a 4-year, I believe, $72 million deal. They signed Nate Davis to a 3-year, $30 million deal. They also brought in local guy TJ Edwards. I believe he is from the Chicago suburbs. I'm going to look this up. Yeah, TJ Edwards is from the Lake Villa area, which is kind of like near Grays Lake and Antioch. So a local kid, they brought him in on a 3-year, I believe it was a $19 million deal. They also brought in Robert Tonyan, DeMarcus Walker, a really solid player for the Titans, and they traded for DJ Moore, a premier receiver from a Carolina team that is just imploding right now, basically. So that's quite the haul for Ryan Poles. And of not even, this isn't even talking about how they very quietly re-signed Kari Blasingame, their fullback. They also re-signed Equinemius St. Brown at the very end of the season, so he'll be with us for another year. And along with that DJ Moore trade, this is something I really haven't actually had a chance to talk about a lot on the radio show. So this is, I guess, probably my first thoughts, to the masses that you'll hear from me. But I think that the Bears giving up the number 1 overall pick is a really risky move, but the haul that they got from Carolina is not something I'm going to complain about. I think I've maybe said before that I didn't want the Bears to trade outside of the top 4. I thought that, trading outside of the top 4 would just kind of, maybe they'd get a bigger haul for it, but it would just kind of strategically hinder them because I think there's a pretty clear drop-off in talent after the first couple picks. However, when you get pick 9 from the Panthers, as well as pick 61 this year, which is going to be a second-round pick, and you get a first round next year and a second round the year after that, and you get DJ Moore, a Pro Bowl receiver, that is a really solid return for the number 1 overall pick, especially since the Bears, they have no business making that pick because they're not going to take a quarterback, knock on wood, but they're not going to take a quarterback. So they needed to trade that pick down, and they did, and they found a pretty good suitor with the Panthers who were desperate to move up to get a QB, and they got a really solid haul for it. So, I'm totally not biased at all in this situation. It's not like I live in Chicago or anything, but I think Ryan Poles is cooking right now. The Bears' big needs going into this offseason where they needed another receiver, they needed serious improvement on the offensive and defensive line, and they needed linebackers. With these moves, both in free agency and by trading, we've locked down our linebacking core. Next year, we're looking at a team of Jack Sanborn, Tremaine Edmonds, and TJ Edwards. Bears playing a 4-3 front. That's a pretty solid group of linebackers if they can all stay healthy. We got our number one receiver in DJ Moore. We also bolstered our offensive and defensive lines by getting Nate Davis to play guard for us and then DeMarcus Walker to play interior defensive lineman. Like, that is a really solid offseason, and we didn't even spend all of our money, too. I don't think we overpaid. Some people were saying we overpaid for Tremaine Edmonds, but think about the contract that Roquan Smith got. Roquan Smith got $100 million, about $20 a year. We paid Tremaine Edmonds less, about $20 million less in total money, and he's pretty close to Roquan Smith's level of talent. I think Roquan Smith is a better middle linebacker, but Tremaine Edmonds is pretty close, and he's a guy who has playoff experience with Buffalo, has a consistent record of playing at a high level, and is still fairly young. So I don't mind maybe overpaying a tiny bit, but I still don't think we did. I think that we still have work to do. I'm not saying that this team's going to go to the Super Bowl. I don't know if it's going to be, like a Philadelphia type thing where now we're ready to make our Super Bowl run. You can compare the Bears to the Eagles all you want, but the reality is, and I'm willing to admit this as a Bears fan, that the Bears have a much worse offensive line than the Eagles did at this point last year. The Eagles have had a good offensive line for 5 years now. The Bears are still kind of finding their footing in that department. We still need to fix the offensive line. I think we need another tackle. I think we need another good pass rusher. But with the draft capital that we have now because of the DJ Moore trade, I think that we're in a significantly better place than we were a few months ago. And in the next couple of weeks, I'll have a mock draft episode coming up because the NFL draft is right around the corner. It's just in about a month. I'll outline, I think, in that episode, you'll get a better sense of how I think the Bears are going to further improve their team. Those close to me, I think I might have shared a very premature mock draft that I have made. Maybe I'll publish it. If you guys really want to, you can see version 1.0 of Daniel's mock draft. I had the Bears taking an offensive lineman at 9. So we'll see. But I think that this is still a really solid offseason from the Bears. And I think that they're going to be in a much better position than they were last year. All right, an honorable mention for teams that I think are in a much better position is the Dallas Cowboys. Look, I don't like the Cowboys as much as the next guy. Like, I'm sorry to all my relatives who live in Texas or lived in Texas, but they're the Cowboys, all right? They're America's team. No one likes them. But anyway, I think that Dallas actually had a pretty solid offseason. They very, very quietly gave themselves a ton of cap room by restructuring Zach Martin and Dak Prescott's contract. They both have very big cap hits respectively, but they restructured them to where they freed up $20 million in cap. They used that money to franchise tag Tony Pollard, which they got rid of Ezekiel Elliott, which I kind of understand, but Tony Pollard is probably the next best thing that they have at running back. And even though he's going to miss a lot of time due to injury that he suffered in the playoffs, that was still the right move, even though it's a running back. And I know Saquon Barkley and Tony Pollard are going to be making the same amount of money, and Barkley is clearly the better player, but it made sense to franchise tag Pollard, okay? So just analytical football fans, don't even start, okay? But that's not the only big move that they made. They traded for Stephon Gilmore. They traded for Brandon Cooks. They finally freed him from Houston and brought him to a much more valuable role. And they kept Leighton Vander Esch as well and Donovan Wilson. And they re-signed Cooper Rush in case Dak Prescott gets hurt again. This is a good offseason from the Cowboys. And, we're not even done with it yet. The Cowboys usually like splurge in free agency. Jerry Jones just throws money around, like he's playing a game of, hacky sack or whatever. Actually, you're not throwing the hacky sack, are you? Well, whatever. My analogies will get better as the episode goes on. But Jerry Jones usually just throws around money. But this time, Dallas was fairly disciplined, and they just focused on rebuilding through the interior and then also making, fairly low risk, high reward trades. Like, I think that the Cowboys actually had a pretty solid offseason. And also, they're in a tough spot as a team because they consistently lose in the playoffs. But they've reloaded in a way that I think is going to make them, at least at this point, look a little bit more effective. All right, so we've covered some teams that are definitely better as a result of free agency. How about the teams who are worse? Now, the first one, I think, pretty easy. I think the Eagles are definitely worse because of free agency. Now, on the surface, this may seem like a surprise because, those of us who have followed free agency so far have seen, they re-signed James Bradbury, one of their good corners. They re-signed Fletcher Cox, the mainstay on the defensive line. They re-signed Darius Slay. They re-signed Boston Scott, Brandon Graham, and Jason Kelsey, who's going to come back for another year. Like, that seems like a good thing, especially the Eagles, who are a team who have been kind of caught up in cap trouble the last couple of years. Like, I mean, that's pretty good. They brought back a lot of the key pieces from the Super Bowl run. However, they also lost TJ Edwards, Kaiser White, two starting linebackers for them. They also lost Marcus Epps and CJ Gardner-Johnson, and that's only on defense. Those 5 guys are main starters of their defense, and they all left. They also lost on offense. They lost Isaac Siamalo, who's one of their guards. He went to Pittsburgh, I believe. And then they also lost Miles Sanders, who went to Carolina. So, like, that is not ideal for Howie Roseman, the Eagles GM. Now, are they doomed? No, I don't think this is, gonna make their chances of doing well, like, so much smaller that, like, they don't make the playoffs or something. I don't know. But they are certainly worse. And it also doesn't help that because they had to spend all their money to re-sign, guys like James Bradbury and Darius Slay, that they really couldn't do a lot to replace the, other players that they had to let go. Like, they replaced Miles Sanders with Rashad Penny, who, Rashad Penny he's all right. He's all right. Is he Miles Sanders? I don't think so. Is this going to matter in an Eagles lineup that has like 3 good running backs, 4 if you count Jalen Hurts, and like 5 if you count some random running back they're probably going to draft in the 5th round who will be fantastic for some strange reason? I don't know. So Rashad Penny, fine, I'll give him a pass. But they also got Jalen Hurts a backup with Marcus Mariota. Like, okay, maybe they can use him as like a Taysom Hill type and, he'll be a gadget for the offense. I don't know. But as far as the defense, they brought in Terrell Edmonds and Greedy Williams to bolster the secondary. But as far as that, like, they really couldn't replace their losses on defense. Which I don't think is going to help the Eagles, especially after with their previous defense, they gave up 38 points to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. So this is a team that is definitely going to be significantly weaker than they were last year. They'll probably be fine, but defenses are hard to maintain in this day and age. But, the Eagles, is their offense going to be able to keep up? We will just have to wait and see. All right, the next team that I think got worse because of free agency is the Green Bay Packers, and it brings me no unhappiness to say. This one's pretty obvious. Aaron Rodgers emerged from his blackout house or whatever in Oregon and like saw his shadow, which means we'll have 6 more weeks of angry Packers fans on Twitter. No, Aaron Rodgers, he went on Pat McAfee's show. Like, this is just the most Aaron Rodgers way of announcing that you're going to leave the Packers. But yeah, he went on Pat McAfee and says that his intention is to play for the New York Jets. proving that he really is following in Brett Favre's footsteps in many ways. Where was I going with this? Anyway, yeah, so the Aaron Rodgers is probably going to the Jets. And the Jets also poached Aaron Rodgers' last real trusted receiver, Allen Lazard. So, they're really kind of stuck with Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson as their receiving core with Jordan Love, which, I think Christian Watson definitely was great as the season went on, and Romeo Doubs had his moments. So I don't think that they're in the worst place as far as offense, as far as like weapons go. But they're still pretty young. So I would not be able to strongly conclude that they'll be able to, replace guys like Allen Lazard. And they're still reeling from losing Devontae Adams. He's just a special player, and Allen Lazard couldn't replace, the production that Rodgers and Devontae Adams had. So, and this is all under the assumption that Aaron Rodgers actually leaves for the Jets. Like, I don't know, there have been rumors flying around for the last couple of years, but finally we actually got information from Rodgers himself saying that he wants to leave. It's not just like this like cold war between him and the GM and the owner. So I don't know. But, you'd think Green Bay would try to respond to that by, improving the offense and improving, just the team in general. But they really didn't do anything. They didn't get any linemen. They didn't get any receivers to replace Allen Lazard. They didn't even get a tight end to replace Robert Tonyan, who the Bears signed. So, that offense is definitely going to take a hit. And, that was a real head scratcher for me. People revere Matt LaFleur and, the Packers management as just being very consistently, sound and making pretty solid signings. But Aaron Rodgers has made a career the last 10 years, the last half of his career of carrying subpar receivers, which I know is the thing that makes him great. But even when he leaves, you're not going to do anything to help him. You're not even going to give Jordan Love any more linemen. I don't know. It just does not seem like the best approach to me. We haven't really seen a lot of Jordan Love. He played, in a couple instances where Rodgers got hurt last year. He looked pretty good. I think that him and Christian Watson could be really good. Romeo Doubs is solid, as I said earlier. And the defense still isn't bad. They still have Jair Alexander. They still have Preston Smith. They still have Devondre Campbell. They still have Devontre Wyatt coming back. They still have Eric Stokes, who's, kind of, the book isn't really out on him yet. But, this is the season, assuming Rodgers leaves, that we'll actually get to see if Matt LaFleur is actually a good coach. Because it's been one of my hottest takes for a while that Matt LaFleur is not actually a good coach, and he merely knows how to deal with Aaron Rodgers, which, sure, that's an accomplishment in his own right, but all of the talk of him being, he's the most successful head coach for anyone his age, I never bought it, but I don't know. If they do well with Jordan Love this season, then maybe he'll prove me wrong. All right, so the third team who I think that just did not really get the job done in free agency so far is the Indianapolis Colts. This may be a little bit of a surprising one. I hate to rag on a team that's currently rebuilding, or at least kind of starting a small rebuild. And I think that moving on from Matt Ryan was probably the right thing, especially since the Colts have been kind of doing this 1-year veteran quarterback carousel thing for the last couple of years, which was a good idea in principle when you had Carson Wentz and you had Matt Ryan and Phillip Rivers. But I don't know. I don't think I think they just need a quarterback to really build the system around and not just have this plug and play, thing at QB. So, and that looks like that's what they're going to do. The Colts hold the 4th overall pick this year. So if they don't get Bryce Young, they'll, or CJ Stroud, maybe they'll get Levis, maybe they'll get Anthony Richardson, who had his pro day earlier today, looked really good. Even if they do get a QB, they may not even start him. But who is going to start for the Colts? It's either going to be Nick Foles or Gardner Minshew. Everyone loves Gardner Minshew, but man, that's just not a good look for a team that really should be contending for the division in a pretty weak AFC South. The Jaguars are good, but the Texans are not ready yet. And the Titans, I don't think are going to be very good. So, you know, I think that the Colts made a couple solid signings this season, hence why I didn't really mention them first as like the team that really did not have a good offseason so far. Like they signed Matt Gay to like a pretty expensive contract, but he's a good kicker. And so I don't really mind that, especially since the Colts have had kicking troubles basically ever since Adam Vinatieri left like 5 years ago. They also signed Samson Ebukam, who's a pretty solid edge rusher. Colts probably needed an edge rusher, so, I think that's a pretty solid signing as well. But they also lost Bobby Okereke. They lost Paris Campbell, who's probably their most dynamic offensive player, not named Jonathan Taylor. And then they also lost Stephon Gilmore, who's a really solid corner. So in terms of their secondary, they kind of just have Kenny Moore to play in the slot, and that's really it. I think the Colts have really solid management, so they still have good pieces, like Darius Leonard's still there. They still have a great offensive line when they're healthy. Jonathan Taylor is there. Michael Pittman, local kid Alec Pierce. I think he went to Glenbard West, which is like a big basketball school in the Chicago area. Like the Colts have just been a really consistently, like decently ran team in the last couple of years, but they really just haven't been able to field like a truly competitive team. So we'll see what happens. I think the wide receiver core is still a bit unproven. Michael Pittman needs another really good year. Alec Pierce looked pretty solid last year, but we'll see if he can put it together, with a young quarterback this year. And the defense, I still think needs kind of a big-time pass rusher. I think Kwity Paye could take that step. Maybe Samson Ebukam takes that step, but I don't really know. I think the Colts, I think they needed to keep Bobby Okereke, to be honest. Even though they have Darius Leonard, they could have shelled out the money to keep Bobby Okereke, but they decided not to, and we'll see if that hurts them or if it doesn't really. All right, I really only intended there to be 3 teams that I didn't think were very good after free agency, but I had to talk about one more, and that one is the Baltimore Ravens. This is going to be pretty self-explanatory, but what are they doing with Lamar Jackson? I have been someone who has defended the Ravens for the last 3 years, ever since they got Lamar Jackson, but now I'm just reconsidering everything. I have gone out to bat for Greg Roman, their former offensive coordinator, before. I think I said on the radio show once that he should have been, the Bears should try to hire him as their head coach. I have said that John Harbaugh is a fantastic head coach, and that the Ravens just always seem to be one step ahead of the curve in terms of free agent signings and drafting down in the later parts of the round. They got Lamar Jackson at the 32nd pick. They've signed, Marcus Williams out of nowhere in free agency a couple years ago. They got Marlon Humphrey pretty far down the board. Patrick Queen was another guy they got in the middle of the first round. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a bandwagon Ravens fan, but I have always just kind of wanted to see them do well. But now with Lamar Jackson, I don't know. I understand that he wants a lot of money and he's pulling a Roquan Smith and negotiating without an agent, but come on. How do you even let it get to this point where he's requesting a trade? The irony in this situation is that Lamar Jackson is almost putting himself in this situation. He is demanding so much money and he wants it to be fully guaranteed. That he honestly should be taking more of the blame for this. And if the Ravens aren't able to trade him, it's not because the Ravens are going to be asking for too much. There should be plenty of suitors who want to trade for Lamar Jackson. But it's just such a strange situation. They didn't even they gave Lamar Jackson a transition tag, which means you can trade for Lamar Jackson. You just need a lot. You need to give up 2 first-round picks for him at least. It's just such a frustrating situation. And for the Ravens, how are you even considering trading for him? What makes you think that they'll just be able to sign or draft another quarterback, in the late first round, second round, maybe, that's that's going to just be able to be plugged into this Ravens team and they'll still be effective. Like, even if you don't draft a quarterback, Tyler Huntley is not going to take you to the Super Bowl. Tyler Huntley is a situational quarterback and a good backup at that, but he is not Lamar Jackson. And like, I don't know why I should have to explain this to the Ravens of all people. Like, the one team that believed in Lamar Jackson, like, now is willing to trade him because like they haven't been able to like talk sense into him. Like, I don't know. This whole situation just makes me angry. Like, if they trade Lamar Jackson, first of all, they're not going to get anything for him, or they're going to get something not very fulfilling for him because the NFL trade market sucks. So maybe they'll get 2 first-rounders, but like, that might be it. They might also have to swallow a lot of his cap space. Like, honestly, teams who are always trading for marquee players 99% of the time have the upper hand in negotiations because the Ravens are getting to that point where they might just get desperate to trade Lamar Jackson away, which again is just insanely like difficult to comprehend given how much success Lamar Jackson has brought the Ravens. So it doesn't help that the Ravens have kind of refused to give Lamar Jackson any true weapons. They didn't really do anything in free agency. I mean, sure, Rashad Bateman is good, but they traded Marquise Brown, who, was kind of iffy in his own right. But, like, apart from Mark Andrews and when Rashad Bateman went down, like, Lamar Jackson has 0 weapons. Like, I mean, I don't blame him in some circumstances that he wants to leave, but I really don't think he wants to leave because Baltimore is, like, making him mad. I think this is just, like, this is part of his negotiation. He's trying to leverage Baltimore into giving him money. If I were Baltimore, I would pay him. Like, I don't know. Maybe I should stop talking about this situation, but like, this is just the whole Lamar Jackson saga. Like, negotiating without an agent is a phenomenon that has been like very frustrating to me. Trust me, we saw it with Roquan Smith, but were the Bears better off when they traded Roquan Smith? I'll give you the answer. It's no. Like, I don't know what makes the Ravens think that they will be better off if they trade Lamar Jackson. If they trade him, their team is going to be immensely worse. If they trade Lamar Jackson, they're not making the playoffs. I'm willing to say that. Even in the AFC North with the Browns and the Steelers, who are like kind of meh, like not probably ready yet, like, if they trade Lamar Jackson and they roll with Tyler Huntley, sure, maybe they'll win 7 games. They're not making the playoffs. And even if they sneak in because they're the 7 seed or whatever, they're getting bounced first round. I'm willing to say that on air. So the Ravens, man, like, I think there's a lot of frustration going around, but they have just taken a massive L in this free agency. And, we'll see. I hope Lamar Jackson stays. I really do. But, we will have to see. It's going to be a very interesting off season as we lead up to the NFL draft. But yeah, those are some teams that I thought just really did not hit the mark in free agency. All right, guys, that's going to end this episode of the Commissioner's Office podcast. If you like what you've heard, make sure to check out my page. It's on Apple, it's on Spotify. You can find it anywhere where you get your podcasts. Thank you for tuning in, and make sure to check out my radio show on 88.1 FM on Thursdays at 4 p.m. Chicago Sports Unlimited. If you don't actually have a radio and you want to just like listen to it on your phone, you can go to WNTHradio.com and listen to it. WNTH is a great website. It's a great station. It airs 24/7. You can listen to it at 3 o'clock in the morning and you'll be hearing some nice music. But if you want to hear me talk about Chicago sports, tune in Thursdays at 4. But make sure to check out some of my other episodes if you like. The mock draft episode should be coming out in the next couple weeks. It'll be out before the NFL draft, I promise. But until then, I'm going to be signing off, and I will see you all next time.